Well, hello again, everybody, and welcome to our fourth Intro to Bible Study video. If you haven't seen the first three, they're in our Emmanuel Community UMC YouTube page. And the first one talks about how to approach reading the Bible. The second one deals with finding a good Bible translation. The third one uses the same system we're going to look at today to ask, how do we understand everything in the Bible? How do we arrange it in our minds such that we can make sense of the whole thing? And today, for the fourth video, we're asking ourselves, how do I go about applying what I learn and read in the Bible? And this is always a little bit tricky, does this passage apply to me? How does it apply to me? What do I do with it? So on and so forth. And the easiest way to look at it is to take any given biblical direction or any given biblical example and filter it back through the system we talked about when it came to understanding the scriptures. And that system is here. First, you look at the person and the deeds and the words of Jesus Christ. You filter everything through Jesus, what he said, who he is, as he appears in the scriptures. And to be careful that we look to who he really is in the scriptures and not just our image of him. And after that, we filter it through the two great commandments, which follows Jesus' direction, where after he gave the two great commandments, he said, all the law and the prophets, all the scriptures hang on these two commandments. So then we go into love of God and love of neighbor. Under that, we look at the 10 Commandments because they give us a certain amount of detail, a certain amount of direction about how to love God and neighbor. So under love God, you have no other gods, you have no idols, you don't blaspheme God, you respect God, and you reserve the Sabbath, you reserve Sunday for worship and rest. And then we love our neighbor by respecting those in authority, by respecting other people's life and health, by respecting other people's relationships, by respecting their property, by respecting and telling the truth, and by being content with what we need. Anything else is detail or application points for one of these 10 commandments, and subsequently of one of the two great commandments. That's how we understand the scriptures. But we can use the same model to apply what we've learned from the scriptures. Because these two great commandments, to love God and to love our neighbor, are not abstract mental thoughts. They're calls to action. Love, or in the original Greek, agape love, means to actively choose to do what is good for somebody else for their own sake, regardless of its cost to us. So when Jesus says, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, he's saying, you do what is good for God and to God, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the cost. And when he says you love your neighbor as yourself, and when he goes even further in his upper room last discourse with his disciples and says, greater love has no one than this, but that they lay down their life for their friends. He's saying, regardless of what's going on, you choose to do what is loving, what is actively good for your neighbor, for their own sake. These are action-oriented words. So once we understand where exactly the commandments or the examples we're reading about fall, we then simply go back up and ask ourselves, this is telling me how to love my neighbor, perhaps by, say, telling the truth. What does that mean in my life? How does that apply to my family as neighbors, my co-workers as neighbors, my physical neighbors? How do I tell the truth to all of these people and show them love by doing so. That is how we look to apply God's direction, God's instruction that he gives us in his word, in his Bible. It's not about facts and figures and names and dates. Those things are important historically. They're important for understanding the stories, understanding the context of what's going on. But when it comes down to application, it's always, how do I actively show love, actively do good for the other person for their own sake? So using this sort of model, it forces us to look at this in terms of action. We do love God, or love our neighbor rather, by actively respecting authority. So any legitimate authority says, okay, you have to do this, you do it. Doesn't matter if that's COVID vaccines, speed limits, whatever. We are called by God, by Christ, to love our neighbor by respecting authority. When it comes to loving God, we are called to love God by actively worshiping him on the Sabbath, on Sunday. And so we need to take steps within our own lives to live into that commandment, into that understanding of taking time to worship God on Sunday. Now, normally that would mean coming to church, but say you're sick, you don't want to get everybody else sick. How then do you keep Sabbath? Well, these days, post-COVID, we've got online services, both here at Emmanuel and other churches as well. You can log on and just watch and participate through the online streaming of the service. That is a way to keep the Sabbath and to worship God. Alternatively, if you're not particularly computer savvy, you can take a special time aside for your devotional reading, for your prayers. Take that extra 5-10 minutes to live into that worship, which is an act of love towards God and Christ. So there you have it. That's how you take all of these different principles and see how you try to apply them. It's, how do I actively do good for the other person for their own sake? How do I actively love them? So I hope this has been helpful to you, and I don't know at this point if we're going to be doing any more Intro to Bible Study videos, probably not in the near future, but we will be starting a new Pastor's Drop-In Bible Study for Lent this year, looking at the last 7 things Jesus said on the cross. And I invite you to join Pastor Jerome and I for that, and we will hopefully see you then. Bye-bye.